the first session. And before I do so, I'll perhaps need to introduce myself. My name is Haruko Kusu, and I'm working with the CITES Secretariat, and I'm leading a unit called the Outreach and Projects Unit. And the topic on the transport of live specimens also lies within the duties of my unit in cooperation with other units. So it's nice to meet all of you, and it's a pleasure to be moderating this session. I think we had about 4 or 5 questions that were remaining from the first segment. So I'll perhaps bring up a few at once. First, I have a question from Mr. El Hadji Samba Demba from Senegal, who was asking about how to transport large living plant species like the baobab, for example. And I believe that we do have a session this afternoon coming up on the transport of flora. So maybe perhaps if I could ask you to please hold that question, and also to ask Ms. Carly Cowell, who will be giving the presentation, perhaps to address that as well at the end of your presentation or during your presentation. The second question that I have on me is from Ms. Ashley Skeen from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Is a live animal reception at Heathrow a privately funded facility, funded by airport or by the government? Perhaps would you be able to perhaps respond? Maybe that'll be directed to one of the UK presenters from the first session.
Hello there, it's Tristan Bradfield here. Yes, it's quite a complicated answer. Basically, some of it is government funded. There's two parts to the Heathrow Animal Reception Centre. There's the law enforcement part, which is government funded by the City of London, which is effectively a local government, and then the actual looking after of the live animals, especially some of the non-CITES breeds, the dogs and cats that come in through under the pet travel scheme, that's basically paid for by the importers coming through. So the actual animal welfare and the looking after them during their transit stops, etc., will be paid for by either the airlines or indeed the shippers themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question that I have is from Mr. Gaston Lua Constant from the head of the inspection service at the Ivory Coast Airport, Cote d'Ivoire. He would like to know if there are specific measures for the transit of wild parrots listed under CITES. These species are generally in crates that do not meet IATA standards, and the grids of these crates do not allow the parrots to be correctly identified, and it is difficult to open the crates at the risk of them flying away. I would like to know if anybody would like to share their experience on how, if they had encountered similar situations.
Again, if nobody else wants to answer, it's Tristan here again. We don't tend to encounter issues like that, maybe because of our reputation. If there's issues with identifying the animals, no matter what species, then we have the facilities usually to be able to remove the animals. So in the case of birds, if there's mixed species within a single compartment, we may need to remove them from the travelling container if instructed to do so by Border Force, who enforce that legislation. If we don't need to, obviously we won't remove them from the container because that will add additional stress to the animals. If we're looking at individual specimens, we'll try and read the ring numbers or indeed read the microchips without removing them from the travelling container if at all possible. But we do have the facilities to be able to do full identification at Heathrow. Other airports might not have such facilities, and therefore I can't answer for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I also see Matthias's physical hand is up, please.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think that the answer is also it depends on your legislation. You need to have legislation in place that allows you to act in cases where animals are transited through your airport so that you can take action and maybe seize them or and place them and take any measures. So it really depends a bit what your legislation allows you to do when you have such a case. In the case of Switzerland, we do have in our legislation a specific arrangement that in transit we are allowed to take action in transit of live animals. So it usually also always depends on what your legislation allows you to do.
Thank you very much. Two more questions. One question is from Mr. Christian Abramonte from Serfor, Peru. How do you verify a shipment of cargo of 20,000 turtles? Do you count all of the specimens, or do they only do sampling? Would any of the speakers like to volunteer
Again,
to respond?
Tristan here. Looking at the number of participants here for the second session, I see a lot of my colleagues are no longer on the session. So again, we would select a number of containers and count the number of animals in the container and then multiply it up. Normally, we would do a minimum of 10% check-in on all imports coming into the UK, and indeed any transit animals if we're requested to do an identification. But also, Border Force may ask us to do a full examination and count every individual animal. So it depends on what we're asked to do, but we would normally do a 10% check initially. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. 10% of 20,000 is still quite a lot, so that's impressive. Okay, so the last question I believe could probably be directed to the Secretariat. It's from Mr. Jorge Quituta Jordana, which says that CITES authority has suspended Angola for trading some of the specimens listed in CITES. This measure is harming the business environment with other countries. Is there a horizon for the lifting of the suspension in the short term?
Thank you, Haruko, and thank you, sir, for the question. Just to remind, the trade suspension that is ongoing currently in Angola has been implemented as of 10 January 2024. This is based on a recommendation from the Standing Committee regarding the completion or advancement of Angola's National Ivory Action Plan, which is called NIAP under CITES. So there is no fixed deadline or date at which the trade suspension could be lifted. However, what is expressed in detail in the report to the Standing Committee and the notification to parties is that this suspension is linked to the implementation of the recommendations on NIAP addressed to Angola. So as soon as the recommendations are implemented and the necessary reporting is sent to the Secretariat, those steps should help Angola achieving the lift of the trade suspension. So this is linked to the implementation of the National Ivory Action Plan recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. If there are no other hands up from the speakers, I'd like to now continue with the original agenda for this session after the break. First, we would like to start with the topic of handling dead specimens and immediate triage in the case of sick or injured live specimens. And we have Ms. Laura DiPrizio from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Great. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to present on this topic. Today, my name is Laura DiPrizio. I am a wildlife inspector with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Office of Law Enforcement, part of the Wildlife Inspection Program. I've worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service for over 23 years, 15 years of which have been in law enforcement as an inspector. I've worked at numerous ports of entry throughout the country, including some of our major ports, our busiest ports with live animals, such as New York, Chicago, and Newark, New Jersey. In this presentation, I'm going to highlight a small portion of what handling sick or injured wildlife specimens are, and I'm going to focus on fauna, on live animals. It's worth noting here in the United States, as in numerous other countries, there are national measures that apply to humane transport and IATA regulations for both CITES listed species and non-protected wildlife. So you may see photos and hear experiences that are involving non-CITES listed species, but the information and concepts can apply to animals at any protection level. The following will be our objectives. First and foremost, safety. You will hear me repeat safety guidance numerous times throughout this presentation. It is critical that safety of yourself, the wildlife, and those around you is always at the forefront during your assessment of the situation, when you make decisions, and when you take actions. We're going to discuss incident response and how to minimize risk and the immediate triage of injured or sick animals, and the critical role of partnerships in these efforts. Lastly, if there's time, I will also discuss handling of dead specimens. I'd first like to share with you an example of a successful partnership in regards to injured animal that was smuggled into the United States. The pictures you see here on this slide are of a small, a pretty young tiger cub that in 2018 was smuggled across the United States border by foreign nationals. The cub had been heavily sedated to the point that it was life threatening for this transportation. And during the incident, the smugglers had decided to, it was too dangerous, and they decided to get rid of the bag that the animal was being carried in by throwing it out the window of a car. Um, what happened was that US Customs and Border had found the bag. Once they began to open it and they realized what was in it, they took measures to safely transport it into a climate control environment, in which they did check its vital signs. They contacted the US Fish and Wildlife Service and a local zoo. That animal was immediately brought to the zoo, and it was saved, although it was ill for quite some time due to the overdose of the sedative. And actually, I'm going to go back a slide. You can see him here doing quite well. This is from the Gladys Porter Zoo. This is a great example of our partnerships and how we handled these circumstances. So there's three focal points to consider when working with these live specimens. Each of these points can be applied to any conveyance type, and they're both applicable to both known shipments of wildlife and those that are smuggled. First one is prepare. The preparation for any live animal is critical. This has been discussed by previous presenters and is worth mentioning again. A lot of times, shipments of wildlife being transported are a routine process. We sometimes get a little complacent with our preparation. However, if you're prepared for those known shipments of wildlife coming in, you're also simultaneously preparing for your smuggled wildlife and those unexpected situations where poor container construction or an unforeseen injury or illness is discovered. The first thing is always to maintain your personal protective equipment. Again, you'll hear safety. Resources are limited in some places, but at a minimum, any inspections or any handling of these animals and their crates should be done with disposable gloves, and preferably puncture resistant gloves if you can use those as well, and face coverings. You may determine throughout your evaluation of the situation that additional protective equipment is required, but gloves and masks are your first line of defense. They protect both you and the wildlife. Know who to call. Establish relationships and maintain contact lists before you ever need them. For humans, please make sure that you know your local hospitals, your first aid supplies and locations, and any emergency response personnel that might be needed should a human get injured, whether it's by an animal or during the process of handling a live animal. Establish relationships with your partners that can provide veterinary care for live wildlife. Oftentimes, when the situation is very dire, the best thing that you can do for the wildlife is get them as quickly and safely as possible to a trained veterinarian for care. Inspect. So this is your second area that is of great importance. And I want to highlight what some of the other presenters have also said, which is you don't just inspect the animal. Sometimes you can't, as we just heard earlier regarding birds. It can be sometimes hard to see into the crates, but what you also need to keep in mind is inspect your surroundings, inspect the container and potential hazards around that container. Look at people's behavior. We're going to go into this a little bit further on the next slide, but maintaining your surroundings and being aware of the things are very important. So please do not rush this. Once you've done your preparation and you've conducted your inspection or assessment, then you can move on to your response. After conducting these, you have your short-term immediate care and security needs to assess. Is the animal secure? Is it out of immediate danger? Does it need immediate life-saving treatment? Or maybe just providing water and food or moving the animal container into a better, quieter location will suffice. Long term is going to include probably investigations and, as this workshop is designed for, also policy recommendations. So discussing this at the workshop and establishing communities of practice. For immediate triage, this is again going to be when you come upon a shipment and you either discover that it's a smuggled shipment or that there's injuries. On the left here, you will see we have some infant spider monkeys that were also found in a backpack at the US border. We have some mink, which, although not a protected species, has quite the wildlife trade presence. And then we have some smuggled box turtles. Safety, safety, safety. Safety of the animal and of the public and yourself is critical. You may need additional safety equipment. Please do not skip it. Stressed animals are more susceptible to illness and disease, and the protective equipment is for their protection as much as ours. Isolate your containers and evaluate your surroundings. If the containers are not severely compromised, have them isolated in place or moved to decrease any loud noises, fumes, extreme temperatures. This is going to give you a safer environment to continue to conduct your assessment and to provide any care for the animals that you may need. You need to look at what the potential hazards are. If there's anybody around behaving strangely, if there are people that shouldn't be present during your inspection. You have an expectation most likely about what might be in the crate, but you never know. So give suspected wildlife species the space that they need. Do you need armed personnel in the case of large, dangerous animals that might attack? What would be the best situation if an animal escapes? Are you going to bring it into an enclosed environment? Are there escape routes that it could use? Temperature and hydration are going to be critical when responding to any issue with a sick or injured animal. Assessing the wildlife's temperature and hydration needs, changes in any temperature should be gradual, except for extreme cases. And offering water or hydrating foods is safe to do so as it's closely monitored and the animals, the crates have been properly managed in that you can access them without handling the animals. And documenting and seeking immediate veterinary care. This is important for several reasons, of course, but one of the big things I want to share with you is the use of taking videos during these inspections or incidences that you can then provide immediately to your local partners. They can assess the injuries and they can look at and give you proper and safe transport guidance. And they may also be able to assess what their facility capabilities are. Oftentimes, we're asked how many animals, what are their size, and do we know what their sex is, their adult, juvenile, etc. And honestly, a video or pictures can often answer a lot of these questions. Again, partners. As I said before, sometimes the best thing you can do is get the animals as safely and quickly as possible to professionals who know how to handle their veterinary care. Pictured here, we have the New England Aquarium located in Boston, Massachusetts, and they aided us greatly recently in smuggling box turtle seizures. Over 100 animals had been seized in pretty bad condition. Many had life-threatening ailments and various wounds that had not healed properly. They were able to take in the animals, provide them with the medical assistance, and in some instances, humane euthanization. Our Shed Aquarium, located in Chicago, aided in the care and housing of quarantine of 50 juvenile arapaima fish. This was something that our wildlife inspectors had intercepted and seized, but as you can imagine, we did not have the facilities to care for such a aquatic species with specific needs. And sometimes the best and safest thing for the animals is to use these resources and ask veterinary staff that have secure facilities to assist in the conduct in the assessment of the animal and in conducting inspections. Um, Pictured here are some very unsafe methods that an agency used to um, open cans that they had found snakes in via x-ray. They were king cobras. As you can see, they're not using, they have some gloves on, but they're not using the proper methods that we would normally use when handling an unknown reptile. But the x-ray here in the middle shows you a situation in which our local security at the airport discovered some animals in via x-ray in their luggage, and they contacted us, and upon the initial assessment we determined that the safest thing to do was to seal up the containers in a humane manner and bring it to our local zoo, in which they had a specialty in handling venomous snakes, and they had a very biosecure situation. None of these animals turned out to be venomous, but given the situation and the public location of where they were found, this was our safest bet. And with that, I'd like to thank you all. If we have time, I can take some questions or save them till the end, and also provide in the future my contact information. And if you have additional questions, please reach out.
Thank you very much, Ms. DePrizio. We'll be taking questions after two more presentations on a similar topic. So please hold your questions, or you're welcome to also put them in the chat box and we'll be able to take them for you. The next presentation will be two presentations, will be on temporary holding of wildlife before and or after transport. The first is by Mr. Louis Lelanchon from International Fund for Animal Welfare, followed by Ms. Mercy Kunsom from the Forestry Commission of Ghana. So, Mr. Lelanchon, you have the floor first.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to, here we go. So thank you to the CITES Secretariat for the kind invitation to speak today on the temporary holding of wildlife before and or after transport. My name is Luis Lonchon. I'm head of wildlife rescue for the International Fund for Animal Welfare, a nonprofit. So today I will be speaking about temporary holding. And so in our terms, in our book, that usually refers to 24 hours or up to 48 hours pre or post transport. It's important to highlight that temporary holding, as we've seen with the previous speaker, is really a key step punctuated by really important priorities, including operator safety and public safety, biosafety risk containment, animal survival and welfare, and evidence integrity in the case of incompliance or illegal trade, for instance. So, as mentioned by previous speaker, this is really a vast topic. So I will focus only on the key consideration for the welfare of the specimens. And obviously noting that safety, biosafety, and hygiene, evidence management are also cross-cutting considerations that should not be forgotten. But when it comes to temporary holding, key considerations really are on environmental parameters, provision of food and water, and appropriate containment. So when it comes to environmental parameter, they are taxa or species dependent. So obviously they will differ, but they include temperatures, or just as an indication and a general guidance when it comes to mammals and birds, this is usually a range of 18 to 30 degrees Celsius. And for reptiles, 24 to 30 degrees Celsius. Lighting is also an essential parameter, with dim lighting having the potential to reduce stress. But also a word of caution here, that if it is too dark, many diurnal birds will not feed. And the last one being humidity, which is to a lesser extent a parameter that can be critical to some species. So food and water. In general, the smaller the animal is, the more often it needs to feed. So for carnivorous animals, they can often go for a day or two without food. Obviously, here a word of caution when it comes to birds of prey that can get their water intake from food. Infants animal also require regular feeding, and uneaten food should be removed after 2 hours. In the case of herbivores, insectivores, omnivores, they should be fed regularly and or have access at all times. And the provision of water should be done and executed via self-fed feed bottles for small mammals and birds, for example, or using spray bottles. For instance, some lizards will only drink from water droplets. Another key consideration is to be mindful that dehydrated animals should not be fed, and so rehydration should actually come first. And for the containment, which is another really important parameter, here again, we've seen that these are species or taxa dependent. So in addition to being safe, escape proof, size appropriate, and located in the right place, which is usually a quiet room with the right lighting or environmental parameters. Enrichment should be provided. So this can include perches for birds or boxes to hide for other species. And it's very important to remind to recall that optimal hygiene practices should be observed at all times during that phase. And when we're talking about a lot of different species, obviously, when in doubt about the specific needs about a species or a specimen, for instance, infants, external resources can and should be mobilized. So that includes, wildlife management or scientific authorities, veterinary services, and so on. And ideally, cooperation agreements should be established in advance. And we can mention as a great resource care manuals by ex situ facilities that can be really useful during that phase. I also want to highlight, and this has been done by a previous speaker, but the opportunity of establishing confiscation advisory networks to aid on the issue. I won't have time to show you this video, but I will put the link in the chat, which echoes the previous session on seizures and confiscations. We've launched recently an online learning program on handling live animals in the context of enforcement operations, which is open to government agencies, and officers and agents can actually enroll freely. And this is part of a project that has been funded with the generous support of the US Department of State. So I will put the information in the chat, as well as the registration forms in English, French, and Spanish. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to now give the floor to Ms. Mercy Kunson from Forestry Commission Ghana. You have the floor.
Okay, yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, CITES Secretariat, for this opportunity. So, and I'm currently the manager in charge of wildlife exports and imports at.
The interpreters requestfully respect the speaker to try to remove her video to improve bandwidth, as the sound quality is not good enough for interpretation at this time. Thank you for your understanding.
We're taking you through some practices that Ghana has adopted in the temporary holding of wildlife before and after transport. So just by way of information, I would say that air transport, as we know, is a preferred method of transporting most live animals in various countries. So in Ghana, the Wild Animals Preservation Act, that is Act 1971, LI 684, regulates the capture and possession of all transports of wildlife. Okay, so Wildlife Division of the Forestry Commission, which is also the CITES Management Authority, is the main authority responsible for enforcing all these laws regarding the humane treatment of animals before and after transport. Okay, so let's go to my next slide. That's good practices before transport. So prior to transporting of any wildlife through the Kotoka International Airport, which is the main airport of my country, we collaborate with, that's the Wildlife Division, collaborates with the Veterinary Services Directorate, and we ensure that all lab tests pertaining to the animal has been conducted. And we assess whether the wildlife is in good condition according to all standard operating procedures. So this leads to the issuance of veterinary health certificates, which I believe all other countries also do have. And then the animal is declared fit. And this will allow the animal to be transported to take care of any zoonotic diseases for biosecurity purposes. So my next slide, wildlife officers at the airport have also liaised with most of the cargo offices to the extent that we are able to receive all manifests on a daily basis. So in that case, it's also another good transportation procedure that we have adopted. We are able to know all the shipments that are coming in the airport. So in situations where wildlife has been transported already into Ghana, I'll say that the officers also work with the custom officials to make sure that all the all the shipments that are coming into the country have followed all the procedures before we have allowed them into the country. So prior to shipment also, animals that are due for shipment are also held in facilities. So please, next slide. Animals that are due for shipment are also held in facilities that have sufficient space for proper ventilation. As we all know, we also make sure that the animals have adequate food and water and protection from extreme weather conditions. The officers also ensure that cages and crates or other enclosures that are used for these wildlife shipments have been designed in a way to avoid injury, that is, in due course, when it's being transported. So, regarding holding periods, this next slide, the animals are not held longer than needed. Next slide, please. So, on the holding periods, yes, the animals are not held longer than needed for transportation between these facilities. Make sure that the minimum holding period is quite very minimal. And then animals are also protected from, as I said earlier, harsh weather conditions. And I think this has been repeated. And we also make sure that enough moisture and food and water is provided to reduce any physiological stress or dehydration that might have be associated with the transporting of the animals. And our officers also ensure that the sick or deceased or injured animals that are in the shipment are not transported. That is if you find out that they are. Okay. So I just want to take you through some small challenges that we go through at our airport regarding the shipment of wild animals. So occasionally there are delays in flights sometimes, and this prolongs the holding period, causing stress to some of these animals. This is quite inevitable, but we are trying as much as we can as enforcement officers to avoid these issues. Then the second one that I will talk about is sometimes the temporary holding of these containers should be cleaned and disinfected before, after, and after each use. Sometimes the time interval is too small between one flight and the other. So this is also a challenge and it's not always disinfected. And we are really working on that to make sure that that time interval we get these cleanings done. And then also, I would say that we have some inspection materials that is quite inadequate. It's also a challenge now currently at my airport. And the space for holding these animals when they are in their large quantities, the space is a little inadequate. So it's also a challenge that we are probably working on it, talking to the airport authorities to get us a much more bigger place to do these inspections. So I'll say that there are a few solutions that we have thought of, and then we will say that the officers are able, regarding the challenges I mentioned so far, that there is adequate food and water, and also the temporary containers, as I said, even though it's a challenge, we are trying as much as we can to make sure that it's always cleaned before each shipment is done. Okay, it's 5 minutes for this presentation. So I just have some few pictures to show you regarding what we do. Next slide. I think that's slide, yes. So these are just some few pictures of some shipments that went through, I think, about a month ago. The first one is a picture of a millipede. You see the container and the perforations that are allowed. The second one is the draft gecko, sorry. And then beneath pictures of some consignments that have been prepared and ready from the airport. The last one, please. Okay. So as I said earlier, we make sure that all consignments are also labeled properly. So beneath there is one of our officers inspecting fire skins. Yes, and we also make sure the last picture is also obviously showing a properly labeled consignment that is due for shipment. So these are some best practices that Ghana is ensuring to make sure that all wildlife that is leaving the country is in good condition, and of course is meeting up to the IATA regulations, as the earlier speaker said. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can let me know. My email address will be shared in the comment section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kunson. I would now like to take questions from the participants for any of the three presentations you have heard. I think I see a hand up from Ms. Sarah Walker from ASA. Ms. Walker, I think you can open your microphone now.
Hello, Sarah, your mic is on.
Ms. Walker, I think you have your mic open now. Hello? Okay, perhaps we'll just close Ms. Walker's microphone for now as she's sorting it out. I'll go to the next speaker or next question from Sultana Nigar, Bangladesh.
Hello,
Yes, we
I'm
can hear
Nigar
you.
from Bangladesh. Are you listening?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I have a question about food and water related. For transport or shipment, most of cases are permanent logs, especially birds. Sometimes export or import times takes 24 or more time with transit or delay flights. That time foods are grow microbacterial or other infections. Sometimes water are spoiled by animals' wastes. I have a question. Is have any facility to change food or water regarding transit or delay flights?
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Ms. Nigar. So perhaps question to any of the speaker, if you would like to give some examples about if there are any facilities to change food or water during transit, especially in cases of delayed flights. Ms. Gabriela Tamasi, is that in relation to this question?
Yes, I'm happy to take this question. So this really greatly depends on the operator or airlines and the transit points. Some airports are better equipped than others. We are incredibly fortunate to have one of our main hubs at Heathrow, where we have multiple facilities where it is possible to change the water and the food, but this is by no means a standard across the globe. So you need to take this into consideration when you plan such long transport journeys for animals. And I would advise that this should be a major consideration in your planning. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. If I see no other questions, I'd like to thank the presenters very much for your informative presentation. And I'd like to move to the next topic on biosecurity. And we have Mr. Kevin Torregrosa from Wildlife Conservation Society. You have the floor.
Thank you. See if I can. Okay, you see my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, yes. Hello, thank you, and thank you for having me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about biosecurity practices here at the Bronx Zoo. My name is Kevin Torgros. I'm the curator of herpetology at the Bronx Zoo. So, admittedly, this will be a little bit reptile and amphibian focused, but the underlying principles behind our policies and procedures can certainly be applied beyond just the animals I'm speaking about today. So in speaking about biosecurity, what we're talking about is a set of management and physical measures designed to reduce the risk of introduction, establishment, and spread of animal diseases, infections, or infestations to, from, and within an animal population. And here at the zoo, we're focused mainly on two areas or scenarios in protecting animals in our collection through the use of biosecure practices. Specifically, that's to protect the animals in our collection here at the zoo, but then also for any of our in situ conservation programs where animals are going to be taken from the zoo and released back to the wild. There's another set of biosecurity procedures that we follow specific to those programs. So when we're talking about protecting the collection, this mostly has to deal with animals that are going to be coming into the collection, new animals coming into our collection. And so we want to ensure that the animals that we're bringing in are both healthy and, to the best of our knowledge, free from disease that could threaten the animals in the zoo. So we accomplish this kind of through two phases. First, through pre-shipment disease screening, and we try to do as much pre-shipment disease screening as possible before animals are brought into the collection. So this would include taxa-specific or species-specific screening. There's a different set of pre-screening measures for crocs as opposed to snakes or turtles, or then of course certainly if we get into the other taxa mammals and birds as well. We tend to always require fecal screening for to check for any parasites, and blood analysis and radiographs to look for any underlying disease. When we're working with other zoos, most of these are fairly easy to accomplish, so we're pretty reasonable. We're pretty confident that the animals that are coming into the collection are going to be healthy. Of course, when we start to talk about things like what we've talked about earlier today already, large confiscations, unexpected animals coming where we don't have a lot of history or the ability to do any of this disease screening, it kind of adds an extra challenge. And so we do have to be adaptive, and it can be, like I said, a challenge, but that's where quarantine comes into play. So even with the animals that are able to go through the extensive pre-shipment disease screening process, we still have quarantine procedures. So a minimum of 30 days. This is in place for all of our animals, no matter how much pre-shipment disease screening has been done, and typically applies to animals coming from other zoos. This will increase depending on the history of the animal. So if we're unable to get the pre-shipment disease screening done, that might extend the time in quarantine so that we can continue to do additional disease screening. While the animals are in quarantine, we still try to do an additional 3 fecal screenings. Again, all of this is in place to ensure that the animals coming into our collection are healthy and to protect the animals that are already here. When we're talking about our in situ conservation programs, I'm going to speak about a couple of these specifically, but in the herpetology department, we have 4 that we're currently working with. So the Kehansi spray toads, Rhode Island snakeneck turtles are both international programs, and we have 2 native programs, the eastern hellbenders and bog turtles. So both the Kehansi spray toads and the Rhode Island snakeneck turtles are programs where animals are bred and raised here at the zoo with the expectation that they will be returned to their range countries. And then our Eastern Hellbender program is a Head Start program where eggs and larvae are collected from New York streams. Those larvae are raised until they're at a size where we are more confident that the survival will increase and they're returned to their streams. Bog turtle program is in development, but it will be a similar model to our Rhode Island snakeneck turtle program, where turtles bred here at the zoo and juveniles raised in biosecure facilities will then be returned back to bogs in the wild. So for both quarantine procedures for existing animals in the collection and for our in situ programs, isolation is kind of key. So we're trying to isolate these animals from the rest of the collection to, again, mitigate the chances of any exposure to any pathogens that could come into contact. This is especially important for animals that we expect to be returning to the wild. There are some, we've mentioned a few earlier today, even where there could be asymptomatic carriers of certain diseases that are might even be fairly prevalent in zoo populations, but we would not want those animals to be released in the wild and expose what could be a novel pathogen to wild populations. So this is also, the isolation is a bit of a challenge in the zoos just because of the space that's available to us. So while we can try to isolate animals in rooms, sometimes we have to isolate within existing buildings where there are other animals nearby. So we have to take additional steps beyond, because we can't just simply have one building for each species. So we do have to get a little creative and make sure we're following fairly strict biosecure policies for each of these animals and areas. So this is the Eastern Hellbender room, which has its own dedicated life support. That's all of the filtration here is only for the animals in this room. It has its own dedicated HVAC system, which is keeping it at about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's about 20 Celsius in this room. And so everything is isolated and contained in this room. Supplies are dedicated to this room, and everything happens basically self-contained within this room for the Eastern Hellbenders. So this is in the same building, and this was one of the challenges that I was talking about. So this building is called our Amphibian Propagation Center. So it houses two of our programs, the Eastern Hellbenders and the Keehonzee Spray Toads. But even though they're in the same building, they're still managed as isolated populations. So this is the filtration system and mist system for the Keehonzee Spray Toads, again, separated from the Eastern Hellbenders. And so then there's, of course, there's another room clearly labeled and marked for the Keehonzee Spray Toads. And I'll get more into this in a little bit, but we also have dedicated personnel. So it won't be the same person who is servicing and caring for the Hellbenders that will then be caring for the Keehonzee Spray Toads. But again, everything is self-contained in this room. So again, its own HVAC system for the Keehonzee Spray Toads, its own dedicated supplies, dedicated sink. These, of course, are all the toads in here. And in this room, there's even bug production. So we raise, I think right now, 5 different types of insects to feed the toads that we can do within this room and not have to pull food from areas where other animals in our collection are kept. So again, the underlying principle here is just isolation and trying to contain and protect animals that are going to be returned to the wild from the animals that are in the rest of our collection. We continue this, this idea of trying to keep things isolated by using PPE. So, on the most basic side of it, it's things like a change of clothes or a Tyvek suit or lab coats. We do have shower facilities and washers and dryers. So if we need to, keepers can completely change from one set of uniform to another to make sure that they're not tracking something from the rest of the collection into the biosecure rooms. Of course, gloves, mask, and dedicated footwear and foot baths, all again to help mitigate the chances of spreading any underlying disease. I don't know if this video I did upload because I was told I had to do that to get sound. We'll see if it'll work. So this is one of our dedicated keepers. So this is Alana Frank, one of our reptile keepers, and she's in charge of caring for our Rhode Island snake-necked turtles that are planned to be returned to Indonesia. And she's just going to kind of, if this works, go through a kind of a run through of how she prepares to service one of our biosecure Rhode Island snake-necked turtle rooms.
Here we are at our biosecure room for the Rhode Island snake-necked turtles, and I'm just getting suited up to.
Just to confirm, is the sound working on that video?
Yes, it's working, but just to let you know, you have 2 more minutes for your presentation.
Okay, so I'll Okay, we'll go through it kind of quick. I'll just talk through what she's doing.
Go into the room. This is a dedicated building and room for this biosecure program, as we want to keep them separate from other turtles. I'm the only keeper that cares for these turtles. And when I care for these turtles, I do it first thing in the morning, and then I don't come back at the end of the day if I worked with turtles since then, because we want to keep these turtles, again, biosecure. And I am putting on a dedicated suit, put on a new one every day, to ensure that I'm not bringing anything into the room. So since this is a biosecure room, I want to make sure I'm not introducing any pathogens into this room to these turtles, which are eventually going to be released into the wild. So we want to make sure these turtles are kept safe and healthy. So that's why I put on this suit, these new.
Okay, so we'll stop that a little short, and I'll go back quickly to the presentation. And I'll just talk about this next video of another keeper who is caring for our Kihansi spray toads. So again, dedicated keepers to care for each of these animals or each of these species. So Micah, who is feeding these toads, that's a little baby spray toad, by the way, will not be caring for any other amphibians in the collection for the day. So if keepers are working with these rooms, they have to do them first thing in the morning before they interact with the rest of the collection. And that's how we help to ensure that we're isolating these animals from the rest of the collection. All right, so real quickly, just to talk about some challenges. Staffing for us, we're a small department, and this is kind of be an issue probably for most zoos, especially when we're talking about having to manage multiple biosecure facilities on top of existing care for animals. Logistics, again, having biosecure rooms near each other in the same building, which also kind of ties into staffing. Emergent diseases, we've had to deal with this recently with some of our turtles. Amidomyces or turtle fungus is fairly poorly understood, but it is something that we need to be concerned about since we can now detect it. Permits, this can be an issue, especially with programs like our Rhode Island snakeneck turtle program, where we're only supposed to be raising turtles for a year or two before starting our export process. So we have to make sure that we can get permits in a timely process to keep that program moving smoothly. And then, of course, shipping, because we can't always ensure that biosecurity is maintained along the whole route. We try to do the best we can in packing our animals so everything is clearly labeled, separated, so that if they do need to be inspected, that we can reduce the risk of anybody coming in contact with these animals, especially if they've been in contact with other animals before inspecting this box. So I'm just going to run through those really quickly. We already
Yeah, if
kind
you
of
can
talked
wrap
about
up
most of
your
them.
presentation, that would be
Yep.
great. You're
Actually, this is pretty much the end of it. Like I said, I'll answer questions if anyone has them. So just real fast conclusion. The goal is healthy populations and reducing risk. We want to limit the chances of the spread of diseases both within our collection and to animals in the wild. And then in the cases of the Rhode Island snakeneck turtles, which populations are currently functionally extinct in the wild, and spray toads, which were declared extinct in the wild, sometimes zoo-raised animals are the last hope for restoring wild populations. And then there's my email address if anyone does want to reach out for questions. We don't have time now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torregosa. Just in the interest of time, I'd like to just move to the next session and perhaps consolidate the questions for the two sessions here. So I would like to now move to the session on recognizing high welfare risk detentions. And the first presentation is from Mr. Leopoldo Stuardo from the World Organization for Animal Health, followed by Mr. Basil von A from Zoo Zurich. Mr. Stuardo, you have the floor. Mr. Stuardo, we don't hear you. I'm not sure if you are presenting, but perhaps we could see if you can try in the background with the technicians, that would be great. And in the meantime, we'll move to Mr. Basil von A from Zoo Zurich, please.
Just trying to share my screen. All right, with you.
Yes, Mr. Stuardo, we will work with the technicians to get your audio up, but we would like to ask Mr. von A to go ahead, please, with his presentation.
I'm just trying to share my screen, but I can't since the other presentation is on. Okay, thank you. Terribly sorry it worked before. There we go. I guess you can see my presentation now.
Yes, we can.
So we've heard a lot of things already that I'm also going to touch upon. I just tried to summarize like the key points that I think are very important for welfare, and also mention some points about stocking density. So we need to be aware that a transport for an animal is always a stressful event. The animals are in a foreign surrounding. They have to be captured or restrained prior to transport usually. And stimuli during the transport are very new to the animals. There are a lot of different stimuli that they are usually not confronted with. And also, and that is a thing, especially at borders, unexpected interruptions or holdups can have a massive impact on welfare and on the health of animals. Organization of any transport is, of course, key to the success, and we need to be aware that every species is different. Of course, we try to cluster our taxons in order to get guidelines, etc. But sometimes we really have to look into the behavior and the biology of the species to make the best transport organization. And also events and handling of the animals or specimens before and after transport will massively influence welfare and health, especially because the transport is so stressful. Some pathogens that the animals live with just flare up in the quarantine after transport. About crate design and transport logistics, we heard quite a lot of things already. It's just important to notice that one size does not fit all. Sometimes even closely related taxon can require different needs in their transport crates or logistics. Of course, possibility of checking up on the animal has to be available also to intervene, and provision of food and water is also necessary for most species, but also we have to decide or make a risk-benefit assessment on that. Here you can see some examples. On the left, you can see a crate for Komodo dragons with inspection slides placed differently. You can also see the padded sides a little bit, so that is to reduce the risk of injuries. On the right side, for example, you can see a pretty well-created transport box for small passerines or small birds. And they have these spy holes, so you can check up on the animal without the animal noticing that. You can see the full crate, and this is a pretty brilliant design, so you reduce the stress for the animal massively. Concerning the packing of the animal, there is the manual restraint technique, or of course the training, which is to be promoted if possible. Of course, it costs time, but if this Komodo dragon on the left-hand side, he passes through his transport crate every day. He's trained to go in there, and therefore he knows his crate. And if you have to transport a specimen, he is a lot more docile and comfortable because he already knows his surrounding. It smells like him, and it is 1 point less to be stressed about. So I try to make some key points on different taxons with mammals, especially small mammals. We've heard that they have a high metabolism and ergo a high energy consumption. hypothermia, especially in small and tropical species, happens very quickly. So make sure, even especially if there are delays in the transport, that the temperatures where the crates are stored are correct. And hyperthermia can also occur very quickly if the ventilation is bad or stocking density is too high. In bigger mammals, of course, it's always a question of safety for humans and animals. We've heard about transport crates for elephants and rhinos, etc. You can see a good example here of a white rhino. And you also have to consider that the stress is especially high in prey species or group living species that are separated for the transport. Here you can see some examples. We've already seen a koala in a crate. For a koala, it's very essential. He can cling to his perch and he can sit comfortably in this branch angle. Here on the right side, you can see a harbor seal, which is also trained to enter the crate, and that reduces the stress during transport massively. On the bottom, you can also see examples of where it is very vital if a known keeper to the animal accompanies the transport. This was an elephant imported to Zurich Zoo and was accompanied by a former keeper from the other zoo, which makes the transgression for the animal a lot easier and a lot less stressful. We also have to consider anesthesia or sedation prior to transport. In some cases, that is necessary depending on the facilities and depending on the training standards of the animal. And if that is necessary, it is super vital that veterinarians can make sure that the animals are full awake again prior to transport. I don't think sedation is a very good option during transports, as we already heard. In birds, it has to be considered that they have a high metabolism, a very fast heart rate, and especially they have quite a high body temperature. And that is important to note, especially in tropical species or small species, that they are exposed to hypothermia very quickly. And then again, if the ventilation is not good or the stocking density is high, hyperthermia is a really big issue in birds. So you need a good flow of oxygen or airflow. And of course, food and water is very necessary, especially in the small species, less so in penguins or raptors. But we also heard before, it's not sufficient to just provide food. The animal has to find it as well. And I've seen and experienced some examples which astonished me personally, that the bird was standing in its food, but still didn't eat enough during transport. And also in birds, they are quite prone to injuries of beaks, especially long-beaked species, feathers which can break off when they flap their wings, especially feathers that are just growing. That can even lead to a case where an animal bleeds to death during transport if he breaks one or two wing feathers that are just growing. So that needs to be taken into consideration. Here you can see that crate again that was designed for red-legged honeycreepers. This is a species mainly feeding on nectar, so hypercalcemia happens very quickly in this species. Therefore, the bird needs to be able to feed on nectar during transport. And that means not only the provision of nectar, but also sufficient light. And you can see that on the top of the picture that there is some LED strips. You can see there's an active ventilation. You can see that you can check up on the animal from above as well as through the spy hole where the animal doesn't notice it. And you can even slide these slides in between, so you can move the animal from one compartment to the other in order to change the nectar and have it less stressful for the animal. Then there are, of course, some species-specific things to know. For example, the flamingo, you should never pull the legs close to the body. You should always keep them stretched. And that is also when designing a transport crate, you should make sure that the flamingo doesn't sit down and is not able to stand up again during transport, because they are very prone to over-acidification of the muscles. And once an animal in this stressful situation is lying down, most of the times it never stands up again, and you have to euthanize the animal. On the right, you can see an interesting design of a transport crate for king penguins with a very good air circulation, usually especially during warmer times of year. Even if the transport car is climated, it is a good thing if they have some crushed ice on their feet, so they can also do their thermoregulation, because it is a stressful event for them. And sometimes cheap methods are quite good also. So you can see the packaging of northern bald ibises in some cardboard boxes. We could also use the kennel crate below, but the northern bald ibis are super prone to breaking their beaks and hitting their heads. And in this cardboard box for a non-air transport, this risk is massively reduced. And this has been a transport which was very successful, even though very cheap from the crate design.
It'll be great if you can wrap up your presentation, please.
Yeah, okay. The presentations are going to be shared anyway, so you can go through the reptiles and the amphibian parts, and we already heard a good presentation on that before. Just one comment on fishes. Here, it is very important to note that, of course, the water quality and temperatures are essential. And if you have to check up on fishes in bags at any point, please be aware that opening a bag or container can be very harmful for the fish because of a change in the water chemic. And this can lead to dead fishes pretty quickly if you don't know what you're doing. And just one comment on stocking density. We certainly promote animals to be transported or packed separately in most cases to reduce the risk of injury. And also we have to notice that weak animals will get crushed to death pretty quickly in some cases. And hypothermia and lack of oxygen can occur very quickly. There are, of course, exceptions, especially in animals that live in big groups. So flamingos should be, for example, transported in bigger flocks. They are a lot less stressed out, and the transport and the welfare are going to go much smoother. Also, you can see here, for example, a rhino with a juvenile. They were transported separately, but this crate was adjointed to their enclosure for a couple of months, so they felt completely at ease entering this crate, and they were completely at ease during transport. On the left side below, you can see a parrot transport. So there are two parrots in there, breeding pairs. They know each other, but they are separated with a slide, but they can hear each other. So that also reduces stress during transport. And on the right-hand side, on the bottom, you can see a confiscation of pheasants, which are certainly stocked too high. So the weaker animals will just get trampled upon, and they will usually get injured or even die. So that was that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for intervening.
No problem.
I believe that Mr. Leopoldo's audio may have been fixed, so perhaps...
I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you very much.
Great.
You have the floor.
Perfect. Then I will share my presentations. No. That's the right format. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear it. We can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And I apologize for this technical also issues. It's a completely different system that we used to use. Okay, maybe I can introduce myself. First of all, I'm Leopoldo Estuardo. I'm the scientific coordinator on animal welfare at the WOA headquarters in Paris. And I will talk about the welfare risk detention, which is applied for more or less all the means of transport. And because of that, I put some pictures of the land, sea, and air transport. Maybe a little bit about our organization. We are the Global Authority on Animal Health and Welfare, founded in 1924. Then you can realize that we are celebrating our 100th anniversary. It's a quite important year for us. In May 2003, we adopt the common name of World Organization for Animal Health. In the past, we were well known as OIE. It's a French acronym, Office International des Épizooties. But we changed it, and now we use also that identity. Then, as an intergovernmental organization, we focus on transparently disseminating information on animal disease, improving animal health and welfare globally, and thus build a safer, healthy, and sustainable world. In terms of animal welfare, it's important to mention that we start our work in the early 2000, where our members, that today are 183, gave the mandate to the organization to develop animal welfare standards, which are included in the terrestrial animal health codes, in the number of 14, and in the aquatic animal health code, there are 4. Also, recently in 2017, we adopted our global animal welfare strategy with a vision of the world where the welfare of animals is respected, promoted, and advanced in ways that complement the pursuit of animal health, human well-being, socioeconomic development, and environmental sustainability. And then this global animal welfare strategy is built in 4 pillars. One of the important pillars is the development of standards. In this sense, there is the section 7 of the terrestrial animal welfare health code, in which are all the chapters related to animal welfare, and especially the 3 chapters that are dealing with the transport by sea, land, and air. These chapters give recommendations to mainly domesticated animals: cattle, buffalo, camels, sheep, goats, pigs, poultry, and equines. And they are also largely applicable for other animals like deer or camelids or ratites, but also can be applied to wild and feral animals, but with some specific conditions. And because of that, we collaborate very closely with IATA. And one important aspect that these 3 chapters are currently following a deep revision process. The Code Commission, which is the one that guide the development of the terrestrial code, decided to revise the 3 chapters, and we are in that process. And just some words about the transport of animals by air, with which I mentioned that we are collaborating very closely with IATA to reviewing the chapter 7.4. This is mainly because we already the IATA regulation in 1981 was already approved formally as the guideline for transport of animals by air. You can see the extract of this resolution. And in the chapter 7.4, we have some reference also to the terrestrial code, and in the LAR, also the chapter of WOA is also referenced. And we reinforces that collaboration after the signature of the agreement between both organizations. And we participate also in the Live Animal and Perishable Board from IATA. And also we are looking for the support on the revision of this chapter specifically. I would like to show you an important activity also that it's under one of the pillars of the Global Animal Welfare Strategy, which is the Global Animal Welfare Forum. And in 2019, we developed one specifically on transport. In this slide, I can show you that there was some specific aspect that they were identified and also seen as a key aspect to advance in a better transport of animals. The first one, and I already told you, was the revision of the chapters where we need to include more animal-based oriented measures with indicators and with other tools to assess the welfare of the animals. There was a lot of discussion also the identification of the involvement of the partners, like our competent authority, which are the veterinary service normally, but also CITES and IATA and ATA and the exporters, the importers, the civil society, and the police. Also was discussed the important role of the coordination of awareness campaign, the inclusion of our other science, especially social science, like we were developing some also forum on animal welfare economics and applied ethology, and also the support of the regulatory framework with training and co-regulation, and it's seen across our regulation because we reference IATA. We have a specific work with the ISO in terms of guidance for developing animal welfare certification and CITES. And also we have other tools in our organization that allow us to support member countries to develop animal welfare regulation, especially on transport and slaughter and other. And this regulation needs to be interact between them. Then if we saw the previous slide, all these conditions need to be implemented to have a success journey. And that is more or less what we are doing through the revision process, in which we are going to include the participation of our partners like IATA and CITES, because we have these three chapters, but not necessarily are working together. And I think it's important that we need to avoid repetition and include the last science that we can will be available. And also, just to finalize, to mention that in case that there is no possibility to finalize the journey in good conditions, especially in transport by sea and by land, there is today a special article on actions that we need to develop when there is a rejection or refusal of a consignment. Here we highlight that the welfare of the animals should be the first consideration in event of a refusal. That's, we have a lot of examples in the transport by sea, especially, but not necessarily because there are animal welfare problems, but mainly because there are administrative issues that they were not well managed from the beginning. Then when the animals have been refused by the import country, the competent authority have an important responsibility of this country to make available a solution with, for example, isolation facility, but also to provide the necessary resources to avoid any health and welfare issue. And also, it's important because without posing a risk to the health of national sanitary status of the importing country. And also, if there is no possibility to solve the problem between the competent authority, the countries that are involved can also utilize the informal procedure of dispute. This is Article 738 of the Terrestrial Code, to identify mutual agreed actions which will address animal health and welfare in a timely manner and avoid the problems that we have been seeing. I mentioned especially in transport by sea and by land, but in less extent in transport by air. And then it's more my presentation. I would like to just leave you this document that is have been developed in the framework of our centenary, that you can download it. Animal welfare, a vital asset for a more sustainable world, and that is part of our celebration year. Over. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stuardo, for that presentation, and thank you for the presenters in the last two sessions. Here, perhaps I would like to stop to take any questions. I think I already have two questions that were put in the chat. The first question, I believe, is from the previous session, and question from Cote d'Ivoire, which was also supported by another question from Senegal. And they would like to know if there are any transit corridors for shipping live animals within the airport in Ghana. So I believe this is addressed to Ms. Mercy Kunsom. It says in Ivory Coast and also in other African countries, the corridor does not exist when a package of animal transits through the airport. Due to administrative delays, the package changes status since they enter the national territory and then be reloaded onto the next flight. The risk is that there may be traffic, given that packages are now accessible to forwarders for food, and they can therefore introduce other things into the crates. I would like to know if Ms. Mercy Kunsom might be willing to respond to that question. I don't see her here. I don't know if any other participants or speakers would like to take that question. If not, then we'll try to post that and share that answer with you at a later stage by email. Ms. Nigar, is it related to this question, please?
Thank you to give opportunity. I want to say regarding biosafety issues.
Oh, is this another question related to, or is it related to this transit corridor?
No, it's regarding biosafety issue. Can I?
Okay. Yes, please go ahead.
In airport, always I see a quarantine certificate regarding export or import species. I have a question: does it maintain proper way? Because sometimes we handle or inspection shipment without safety, because we always hurry, we always just handle. So is there have any mandatory rules for every species regarding biosafety? Because after COVID-19 it is sensitive issues.
Thank you very much. I believe that question perhaps could be directed to the presenter from Bronx Zoo, WCS.
I don't know if I can really speak to what policies or practices are in place at the airport. That's one of the issues that we have is in setting up our shipments for export is we try to do it in a way that we can ensure biosecurity for as long as we can. And so in our instance, we tend to send a person with the shipment, at least for the first leg, for the first point for the export, our first airport, I guess. And we try to stay with them through any inspection that takes place so we can just try to maintain that biosecurity that we've tried to keep in place. But if once it leaves that airport, I'm not sure what policies or procedures are in place at other airports.
Okay, thank you very much.
but there have no mandatory rules to maintain biosafety. I maintain biosafety regarding my safety, my personal safety. But
Yeah.
if there have a
We also
mandatory rules,
have Gabriela, who would like to respond to that question.
Thank you. So my response is really about the airport safety. So if the consignment was to leave.
Oh, sorry, I don't think I hear you anymore. Sorry, if
Okay,
you
can you
can,
hear
yeah,
me
yeah,
now?
we can hear you
So,
here.
so if the consignment was to leave the secure area of the airport where there is a potential for anyone to interfere with the consignment, then you would be required to re-screen the consignment before you can uplift it for any further air transport.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have another question from Caroline Davis from the UK. I believe this is directed to the colleague from Zoo Zurich. Regarding the questions about the crates, are your crates designed by your zoo based on husbandry guidelines, or are they designed and built by transporter companies?
That really depends on the case. Usually we would prefer to design all of our crates ourselves, but we have a lot of animal shipments around Europe and the world, especially for the species conservation programs. So we can't really finance every single crate and to be built at the zoo, especially because most of the crates do not return to the zoo. And then we're just sending them out. So sometimes we do create them ourselves with our husbandry guidelines and knowledge and expertise. Sometimes the transporter company will say, okay, I have this and this crate. Will that suit this species? Is that okay for you? And then we go back and forth. And in some instances, the receiving zoo sends a crate, which is or is not up to the standard we like. And then sometimes we just switch it. But that is mainly on non-air transports, which is the biggest part of transports we do.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions regarding the last three presentations or so? If not, I would like to thank the presenters again and would like to move to the next session, which is on the transport of flora. And I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Carly Cowell of Botanic Gardens Conservation International. You have the floor. I'm afraid we don't hear you. Perhaps we'd like to ask the technician again to please help connect to Dr. Cowell's audio, please.
Yes, on it.
Thank you.
Mr. Cowell, are you able to hear us now? Can you try say something to the floor? Your devices have been changed now. Mr. Cowell, are you able to hear us? I will reach out to you on a private chat to try and further determine the issue, because the device change didn't seem to have fixed it.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that you're having audio problems. In the meantime, perhaps we'll move to the next presentation, which is on the accessibility of the IATA LAR and IATA PCR. by Mr. Tahir Hasnain of IATA Secretariat.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I am very mindful of time, and I have good news for the audience. I am going to be to the point, and although 10-12 minutes are allocated for my presentation, but I am going to finish it in less than 5 minutes. I know many of you are fasting due to Ramadan, so we don't want to hold you for long. So my name is Tahir Hasnain, and I am responsible for IATA Cargo Products. I am the product manager cargo solution. So the publications and the cargo solution, they come under my domain. Just give you a quick glimpse of the LAR manual. Annually, around 13,000 plus expert access special cargo manuals, including the IATA LAR. And we produced the first edition printed manual in 1969. And now today we are celebrating the golden jubilee of the LAR manual. In between start of 2000, we started offering the digital editions as well. And these editions are normally produced every year. We do have provision to push the updates during the course of the year. So the first core message of my presentation is I want to share with you that how these large standards are disseminated to the industry. So most of you, I understand, and it was mentioned in the presentation, in fact, the entire industry uses the LAR manual for the live animal transportation. However, many of the industry colleagues, they are not well aware that how effectively they can use these standards. So the first point is, as I mentioned, the content are distributed using printed, digital, and enterprise library. Most of the time, industry is using the print manual, but over the last couple of years, we see the trend towards the digital, and last 2 years, industry has started moving to the enterprise library. So it means you get one license and the entire organization can use it, but at any time, just one user. Also, many industry colleagues, they are not aware that the contents are available online as well as offline. You can use your modern devices, iPad, iPhone, Kindle, to get access to the IATA LAR contents. We also share the LAR contents with the electronic flight bags for the basically no talk completion by the pilots, and also the data is licensed to as well. And as I mentioned earlier, last but not the least, the annual edition, we produce a new edition every fourth quarter, which is effective from Jan to December, and we have provision for content update. And over the year, we have been getting a lot of requests. All shippers, airlines, ground handlers, they use their own system, and what they want is most of the time they have their uh, digital transformation programs, and what they want to do is they want to integrate these contents in their system rather than referring to an external source, and we have started working in this direction. So these manual are you can see over 5,000 plus companies, they use these manual in 161 countries across the 6 regions. And based on the industry demand, we are now planning to offer interactive solutions based on the modern technology, innovative solution that will be based on these standards and regulation. And overall objective is to improve the compliance and increase the operational efficiency. And with the current offering of the publications, the standard challenges being faced by the industry are the processes are mainly labor intensive, and one has to retrieve the information manually. You have to go through multiple chapters, and within the chapter different sections. So it's a time consuming, inefficient process, and as I mentioned earlier, isolated from the stakeholder core cargo or transport management system. And then this often results in non-compliance. We discussed earlier that not everyone has access to the latest content, and the risk of error is quite high, and endangerment for the handling staff and also for the animal. Um, so what industry is looking for is the automated retrieval of information, some auto checks, technology integration, collaboration platform, digital transformation, automated workflows, and artificial intelligence, data visualization that would help in the decision making. So considering the industry request, what we are now investigating is to have a automated solution which would actually address the industry needs. So this solution we are calling it right now the LAR Verify, um, and this is going to be an automated solution that will ensure timely and prompt availability of the latest, accurate, and precise information from the LAR manual, which includes LAR state and operator variations, animal classification and documentation, container and labeling requirement. And this information one would be able to retrieve based on a uh, supplied input criteria, that if I am shipping an animal from Geneva to Nairobi on this particular flight, this airline, let's say British Airways, then system will bring up all necessary information. It will actually pick up from different sections and chapters from LAR, and it will show the aggregated information. That is the first step, and our plan is to go further and then provide the provision to have the auto check functionalities. One should be able to complete the live animal acceptance checklist as well. And also based on the industry request, this functionality is going to be available through the APIs, so that the individual users, they can integrate this functionality in their transport logistics systems, cargo management system, and other operational system to benefit from this functionality. This system is going to be cover the end-to-end supply chain shipment journey from the live animal preparation, planning to book, acceptance, and including the to facilitate the custom controls. At the moment, I will not go into detail because of time, but once you get this material, you can see that the checkpoints where this system will be applicable at various stakeholders are indicated in here. A lot of benefits are perceived: enhance operational efficiency during the shipment preparation, booking, planning, acceptance, control, and of course improve compliance with the regulations, safety, automation of processes. So those were the two core messages: how we disseminate the standards and where we are going. Another thing, taking this opportunity, I just wanted to highlight that we have IATA training are widely used by the industry. Here are some details. You will see the live animal related courses. refresher, live animal transportation, cargo logistics management, and all different live animal courses. And these courses are offered self-study, classroom, and in-house training. I will not go into the details. Um, Last but not the least, we also offer the certifications, cargo certifications, and those are basically done through audit, training, and then the assessment. So it could be, the cycle could be repeated. So what we have done is we have created the Center of Excellence for Independent Validators. It's a certification program to certify organizations for excellence with handling and transportation of special cargo shipment, like the live animals. And these programs are very successful because it provides the opportunity to for the individual user to just validate their implementation of the processes, facilities. So all different dimensions are included. With this, I will hand over back to the Secretariat.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. Perhaps I'd like to turn back to Dr. Carly Cowell to see if your audio has been fixed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
Is that
you
better?
loud and clear.
Okay, let me share.
So I know that these two presentations are rather different, but please keep your questions on for IATA a few minutes longer, and we will try to finish the topic about the transport of flora along with a question, and then we'll go back to the presentation from IATA. Thank you. Please go
Thanks.
ahead.
And I'd just like to confirm you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Last but not least, I'm presenting on the transport of flora. I'm Dr. Carly Cowell. I'm the Director of Policy for Conservation at Botanic Gardens Conservation International. I work on CITES policy and supporting parties on the implementation of CITES regulations regarding plant species, and I previously led the UK Scientific Authority for Flora at Kew Gardens, and I was also a representative for South Africa on their scientific authority. So just to quickly recap, something completely different, we're talking about plants now. All orchid species are listed on CITES. They were the first whole family group to be listed on CITES when it first began. There are many species in trade, artificially propagated, yet there's still sizable trade in illegally collected wild plants of orchid species. And similarly, cacti are the second largest group listed on CITES, entire family of plants. There's about 90 CITES species in Appendix 1, prohibiting their trade from the wild. However, a lot of them are on Appendix 2 and are traded as artificially propagated. Yet here we still see wild harvest and poaching of plants in the wild, and there's recently been a spike in cacti and succulent species. Detection of these species is particularly difficult in transport. So why is PCR important for live plant transport? Well, this graph shows that the majority of listings on Appendix 2 are plant listings, mainly orchid species in the red, and other plant species there in the lighter blue. And then Appendix 1 listing, it's bigger for other plants, which mainly is timber and cacti, as I mentioned, and then still some orchid species. So if you look at the weightings here, a lot of trade in Appendix 2 species are in flora, live plant specimens and cut flowers. So the PCR is particularly important to these. So the PCR provides guidelines for the preconditioning of plants for transport. Do they have enough water? What is the temperature regulations? Very similar to what we've heard earlier today about the animals. We need to ensure that shipping is via the fastest route, so they do not die or degrade. We need to look at the care of plants. We need to communicate the arrival to the importer, and it's the exporter's duty to ensure that there's care facilities available for plants, as well as making sure that the regulations, the paperwork is all there. The permits are easily visible, as well as phytosanitary certificates. There's some general guidelines. Do not leave plants directly in the sun, they will wilt. Extreme heat will damage them. Similarly, putting them in freezing conditions can damage plant species, be they cut flowers or living. Surface mail is generally not a good idea for long distance transport for plants. And it's mentioned earlier today with the regulations regarding animals, but know what media and packing material your plants are being transported in, and whether they are prohibited in the country of destination. So it's quite interesting. All these things that pertain to animals really do flow over to plants. And I know there was a question in the chat about transport of very large specimens, such as baobabs, and there's a picture on the screen. The same standards apply for the packing of a huge tree to a very small cactus or an orchid species. Labels and certificate and paperwork needs to be clearly visible. They need to be packed so they do not get hurt. They need to be kept in the right conditions. Particularly this truck that you see on the screen with the trees on the background, that has to be driven very slowly or plants will get windburn on them. And clearly, it's a very large specimen. It's not as aggressive as the crocodile that we heard about earlier that was being packaged, well, not packaged, but shipped and at Heathrow. But, you need to have space for these specimens when they come in, and you need to be notified about them. So plant species are difficult because there's lookalikes. So this is just a quick image of two different orchid species. When they're not in flower, they're extremely difficult to tell apart. Hence, over 2,000 species of orchids are all listed on CITES because they're very difficult to tell apart. When they're in flower, it's a very different case. You can tell a lady slipper orchid, which is Appendix 1, to an Appendix 2 orchid in flower, and then you can see that the paperwork and the naming is correct. This is why it's utmost important when you're packaging your plants for shipment that you have the correct labels and that they're in flower if possible. It just makes life that much easier for the exporter and the importer. What's also important is the naming on the labels, and consideration should be given to the synonyms, which are alternate Latin names for plant species, and there are many of them. And generally, the accepted name for science is the same as the accepted name for CITES. Sometimes they differ, but generally they are exactly the same. And sources where you can look up plant names are the World Online Checklist of Plants, and Species Plus is excellent. And you can see if you have the correct name, or it's an old name, or it's a new name, and you can list those as well on your permit and on your packing materials. So the definition of artificially propagated, because this is the bulk of plants that are shipped and transported. And there is a definition provided in ResConf 1111, and it has been refined over the years, and it's excellent. And it applies to all three of the appendices, and it does include criteria on controlled conditions, quantities of stock, of the parental stock. And it was mentioned at the very beginning of today that if you do have hybrids and cultivars, and one is from an Appendix 1 species and one is an Appendix 2, it's always the more protected species where the regulations will apply. So it'll revert to an Appendix 1 listing if there's two different parents. So always bear that in mind if you have hybrids and cultivars, and that your paperwork is correct. So some of the enforcement challenges, well, they're difficult to identify. Even for the experts, plants are difficult to identify, particularly when they've been removed from habitat, bundled up, leaves, all growing materials have been removed, and flowers, like in the orchids example I showed earlier. So it is extremely challenging. And to make this and make life easier for transport, packing is correct. Put the right name, package things separately if they're different species, and this will just speed up and expedite the transport of those packages and shipments that are legitimate. We are seeing that the scale of postal trade is massive. It's making routine monitoring extremely difficult. Determining artificial propagation versus wild harvested plants. The experts struggle with this, but there are some telltale signs. and I'm happy to provide some guidelines and posters. And I know the South African Scientific Authority has a poster on this as well and some information. And then also, when they're packed and they're being shipped, plants don't move. They don't wriggle around, they don't growl, they don't thump around and try and break out, thank goodness. But then they are difficult to look at. There are X-ray facilities, but sometimes we still don't pick up plant species. So they're a challenge amongst themselves. We've touched on this for animals and quite in depth. I just wanted to bring to the fore plant and human safety when opening packages and shipments. Plants need air to survive. If they're packaged up and there's no airflow, they will rot and create some very vile, disgusting smells, but also some toxic gases. So you have to be careful when opening a package of plants that has been sealed for a long time in the heat and it's rotting. There are some toxic gases there, and you need the correct PPE to be wearing, face masks and gloves. Don't leave them in the sun, as I said, that can be even worse. Also, containers that are secured and closed tight and left for a long time can incubate insects, and there was a discussion about stinging insects and bees. You can have a shipment of plants that has insects in it, and you quarantine it and seal it up, but when you open it, you could release a lot of these insects, and they could attack you and be quite angry, so be aware of that as well. And then please, the pictures on the screen do show where people have been scratched by plants that are poisonous. A lot of the cacti themselves, they have thorns. They can cause huge infection, as well as plants having oils on them that you can burn your skin. And it may not be triggered immediately, but when you go in the sunlight, you can actually get these blisters forming on your hands. So there's things to keep in mind when opening packages that have plants in them, not necessarily just the animals. Kevin spoke to us about biosecurity. This is a different aspect of biosecurity. Plant pests and diseases can cause economic losses of about $220 billion annually, and more than 240 million containers are shipped globally, carrying all kinds of goods, including plant material, plant products. Many of them are made from wood, from plant materials and products once again. And I've said it before, but it's important to look at your packing material, your crates, and whether the materials that are being used for that are indeed allowed in the country of destination, as well as being fumigated and not being a biosecurity hazard themselves. And then there is the IPPC, which is the International Plant Protection Convention, and CITES is a partner, the CITES Secretariat, the whole group of the IPPC. And online, there's fantastic resources to look at biosecurity for plant transport, phytosanitary, how to complete phytosanitary certificates, what are they all about, looking at your shipment and making sure it's legally compliant, not just with the CITES, but with phytosanitary as well. And here I'd just like to say, we're talking about CITES, this is a CITES workshop, but if there are exemptions and plant species are exempt and don't need a CITES permit, they still need a phytosanitary certificate when they are shipped. I'd just like to run quickly through the CITES Register of Scientific Institutions. This is described as non-commercial loan or donation or an exchange of material between scientists or scientific institutions that are registered with their respective management authority in their state. And it could be live plant material, dried plant material, or liquids and waxes, for instance, for scientific research. So once again, non-commercial. And this therefore allows this free transport, well, not free transport, but no CITES certificate. The free label scheme, both the importer and the exporting institute do need to be registered, not only one. Otherwise, a full CITES certificate is required there. Then we have registered plant nurseries, and this is for commercial trade in Appendix 1 species that can be possible and deemed Appendix 2 for purposes of trade. These nurseries, once again, need to be registered. They have to have quite a good oversight by their management authority of their respective range state. And it's generally in consultation with the scientific authority on particular species of plants. It allows the sale and propagation and multiplication of Appendix 1 species to be traded as Appendix 2 species. Shipments do need to be packed and labeled differently from Appendix 2. They need to be kept separate from standard Appendix 2 species. So when packaging them, put them in different boxes, have the separate labels, put a partition between different plants in a crate if they are indeed Appendix 1 listed but grown in a registered nursery. Then we do have some hybrid orchid exemptions. These are Cymbidium, Dendrobium, Phalaenopsis, and Vanda. And these are your supermarket orchids. Industrial scale production is well established, and special conditions still do apply to the shipping and packaging of these particular ones. So for non-flowering specimens, 20 or more plants of uniform size and appearance have to be packaged together. If they are not, then they are not deemed exempt. This is a very strict regulation in the packaging. If they are flowering specimens, there's no minimum number, but they have to be packed and ready for retail sale. The label has to give the name, the genus and the species, and the hybrid name, and the country of final processing destination. And the top picture there of the 2 orchid specimens ready for sale in the shop is a prime example of this. Where you can find more information is the full note under orchid exemptions, and this can be found on Species Plus. But once again, bear in mind, it's a CITES exemption, not a phytosanitary exemption. And my last slide, annotations. It's good to know annotations when dealing with shipment of plant species, because you may have an exempt species or an included species. So annotations detail specific details of the CITES listing for specific species. It's denoted by a hashtag. They can be inclusive, so the CITES listing only covers certain products or parts, and everything else is exempt, and you do not need a CITES permit for this. Or they're excluding. The CITES listing covers all the products except those that are listed in the annotation. And the best place to get some detail on this, an explanation per annotation, and then looking at each species is the Shipment 2020 document. It's freely downloadable online, and I do recommend anyone who's transporting specimens of plants to look at this and just make sure, are there any annotations that are relevant to your work. I whizzed through that because I know we're short on time, but thank you very much, and happy to answer questions if we still have time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cowell. I'd like to first turn to the participants to see if there are any specific questions towards the plants. I believe that the question about the transport of large plants have been answered. Thank you very much during the presentation. If there are no other questions on plants, even in the chat, perhaps we can move to, we'd like to thank again Dr. Carly Cowell for the presentation, and perhaps I will move back to the discussion on the presentation from IATA. I believe that there were a couple of comments that were already given during the meeting about whether or not the progress has been made to make the IATA PCR and LAR documents available for free to parties. Also and I think those were expressed in the chat by a few parties, as well as the European Association of Zoo and Aquaria. Perhaps I'd like to turn to Mr. Hassan on if you have any questions or comments on that.
So maybe I would like to give you a little bit background. So when these standards are developed, IATA actually take these standards, and we are using 5 other suppliers to actually convert these into the books or digital. All those who are using our standard, they know we are using for example, a third-party platform, which is a paid platform that comes with the cost to access this. We are also using a third-party player to actually print the manual, another company for the delivery. And what I want to say is all of this, it comes with the cost and lot of costs. All these different third-party players, we have to pay for that. And it is not possible for us to offer it free because there is significant costs associated with it. However, I have been having discussion with the CITES Secretariat. We could, once we know the complete requirements, that just saying that make it available free. We have enterprise library. We need to know how many licenses, print, how many, which language editions, all of this. So once the requirements are there, then we will look into these requirements in detail. We will then have to do some internal estimations that how much it costs, and then what we can do is we definitely want to help. We can offer it on cost basis. So we can offer, we can do this through the discount codes or something. So we can definitely help you, but we need to have full visibility on the requirement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hasnan. Are there any other comments or questions? Oh, I see a question from the Netherlands. It says, in the edition of last year, a few chapters were not printed in the IATA LAR book. I would like to check the new edition if they are back, and we had an issue where we could not find the CR for a certain species.
Okay, then I think for this particular question, it is better that they send it by email, and we then look into this particular request, investigate, and get back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take note of the person who asked the question, and we'll be able to communicate that to you. Are there any others who would like to make comments or inputs in addition to what was put in the chat? You're welcome to raise your hand if you would like to, or put it in the chat box. Also, I'm turning to the CITES Secretariat if you would like to make any comments or inputs at the moment.
Maybe I can very quickly mention about this accessibility. So this the IATA Secretariat and along with the CITES Secretariat, we have been having some discussions about this accessibility. And as our colleague from the IATA, Tahir, mentioned that there is some cost to it. So I think we have some understanding of the requirements from the parties through the registration forms of this workshop. However, obviously, not all the parties have responded to this question in terms of how many lines are required, what are the languages. Some have responded. So we are going to consolidate it and look at the responses, and perhaps again continue the discussion with the IATA Secretariat in terms of what is most feasible for all the party of our parties as well as other stakeholders. So that's the comment update from our side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Any other, Mr. Hasnan? Did you want to have the last word before we close?
I think it's very. I'm actually glad to know that we have made progress on this. Yes, happy to discuss and take it further and work together. That how we can benefit the CITES Secretariat for this. So let's have a separate meeting to discuss the details and then we will come up with the clear answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hasnan. So I'd like to now move to the closing remarks by Mr. Matthias Lorcher, Chair of the CITES Animals Committee. Thank you for staying on, Chair.
Thank you, Haruko. Well, I had prepared a 10-minute presentation of the takeaways, but I think I will not do that. Everyone is waiting to continue its work or go home or whatever. So I think the aim of the workshop was to share practices, best practices, and I think we really have heard a lot of this, a lot of good examples. The presentation will be made available to everyone. So I think whoever wants to know what has to be considered in transportation of live animals will find a lot of information in these presentations, and I think that's a really good outcome of this workshop. We also have heard that there is movement in the availability of the LARs, which is something that many parties are quite interested about, and also keen to be able to access this information, which is required in issuing of CITES permits for live animals. So it just leaves me now to say thank you to the Secretariat for the organization of this workshop, WCS for the financial support, the staff of Interactio of solving our technical problems, which haven't been too few, but I think it all turned out well. And of course, a very special thanks to all the people having prepared presentations, made those presentations in very high and good quality. So thank you very much to them. And finally, also thank you very much to all the participants who have listened and been active in asking questions. So with this, thank you to everyone, and I will close the workshop. So thanks a lot, and have a good evening, good day, good night.
Thank you very much. Just a logistical announcement. So thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to close the workshop now. I'd just like to make a logistical announcement to the speakers, those who are still online. If you don't mind staying online for a couple more minutes, because we would like to perhaps make a group photograph. So if you don't mind turning your cameras on, that would be much appreciated.
Once you turn on your cameras, could you also open up your microphone and say something to the floor? Because that's what's needed for you to appear on the screen. Otherwise, you're not going to appear on the screen. So opening up your microphone.
I can say that iftar time is approaching, and I think everyone is in a rush. Those who are fasting.
But we'll do our best to hurry up.
Yeah. No, it was excellent webinar. Well done, team.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Let's take a look who has the best background here.
Thank you,
Of course,
everyone.
Haruko.
Haruko is certainly winning this one, yes.
Okay, Kat, are we okay with a screenshot? Yep.
He says yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for staying on, and thank you also for the interpreters.
Thank you all from our side. Thank you
you
so much, guys.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good evening. Have a good fast breaking.
Bye.
Thanks, Salahin.
Thanks a lot. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Let's keep in touch.